Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we have a very special guest, Peggy Studer. And Peggy, you are the CMO right now of Klaxoon. You've been at multiple times, you've been in the C-Suite as a CMO. You've ran global marketing for companies. You are actually very international in your very DNA, right? You've lived in 7 different countries and 5 different continents, and you've worked at multinational companies. And it's interesting because you actually also help startups. You're aligned in France with the top business school and help startups get started. And you learn a lot from that, and they learn a lot. And so you've got a really great background to take on the subject matter today, which is how do you create hypergrowth, right? In today's B2B companies, with what's going on today and everything that we have to think about, especially as CMOs, but also as just C-suite executives inside of our companies that are helping to plan and, long-term growth. So before we dive right in, what I'd love to do is just give you an opportunity maybe to expand a little bit on that background before we get started.
Thank you, Steve. I'm delighted to be here today. Like you said, I'm currently the CMO of Klaxoon, which is a visual collaboration scale-up in France, but operating internationally in the UK, US, Germany, and the US. And I run all of marketing, right? And by that, I run business insights, product marketing, content communications, acquisition, and digital. It's a CMO role. I've been a CMO before, but initially I grew up through product marketing. And I loved product marketing. I was there for over 15 years because I truly believed that it was the heart of the business. In product marketing, you tend to work with every section of the business. You work with finance, you work with sales, you work with product, you work with everybody. In 15 years, of course, product marketing has really evolved from the early days in tech. When I go back and think about my time at Agencia in 2003, 2004, where I first started versus what it is now, which is a real job, but you still have no studies or universities that will get you there. You kind of land in product marketing.
Yeah.
And and you have this, you've got to be curious, you got to have multiple skills. And so I think for me, it's still seen as an unusual way to then grow into CMO, but I see it as a very natural way because you touch everything when you're a product marketer. I really enjoy that. I still is a little bit of my background where I like to spend time on positioning, messaging, how do you sell, to whom do you sell, which is the core, right? If you want to actually serve the business as a CMO. So if you haven't got that right, it doesn't work. So I've really spent many, many years in product marketing before evolving into a CMO. I've worked in the startups, the early startups of Agencia that grew into a scale up. I've worked in the global multinational companies like CWT, which was a $21 billion company at the time. And I like to navigate both. I like to think big, but I like to roll up my sleeves and see things done versus the politics of a larger company. And I think that's where my value is. I can do both. I can bring expertise, but I can also roll up. I can relate with people. And I think you need to do that in marketing because whichever company you are, you're working with every person in the room with you. So
Marketing is the connective tissue inside of a company. There's no doubt about that, right? I guess probably one of the biggest first insights here, right, is that we really have to think about how we play that role, right? Because nobody else is going to step up and play that role. And it's never defined. You never take on a new role as a head of marketing, VP, CMO, right? And nobody's ever there telling you, okay, you are the connective tissue, right? You're going to make sure that everybody kind of knows we're all aligned on the right insights and the right ICP and things like that. But if you could start us off here, what is in your mind hypergrowth in today's market? How do you think about that? You're doing it now in your own companies. You're helping these startup companies. You've done it many times over. How do you think about, like, when you take on a new role, how am I going to help accelerate hypergrowth?
I think whether it's growth, hypergrowth, how do you grow a business? Marketing is about serving the business, is the way I look at it. My biggest reward is if I actually serve the business with my team and we deliver on our objectives. That's the first mindset you need to have in. And then to do that, there's a set of tools, strategies, assessments. You want to do diagnostics, you first want to do and say, okay, I'm going to go and dig in. I need to understand because if I don't understand, I'm not going to fix it or I'm not going to make it grow. right? You need to be super clear about what you have, where your opportunities are, where your challenges are, so that you can then really put in the strategies in place and then the tactics. And let's not forget the team. And I think one of the things, you're right, it's really changed. I think marketing is probably one of the roles that has evolved the most in the C-suite over the last 10 years. We went from early on product, yes, brand, yes, but then you walked into growth and all that digital and acquisition. Or the CMO was almost expected to be an expert in that. And then 2022 hit, right, where the funds kind of died a little bit in many areas. People started to think of profitability and being a lot more cautious. We know it's hurt the tech industry quite a lot because that was their way of functioning. And so you really just start thinking of, where am I going to spend money? My budget doesn't look like what it used to look like, and will not look like what it used to look like, perhaps. So where am I going to invest? And I think the trick really lies in balancing long-term with short-term. You can't just think short-term anymore. You've got to think of, how am I going to build something that's going to last? That'll help me push through the difficult times that may come up or that we are in today, right? And so you look at everything. You look at your tools. Do I need all the tools? Do I have the right strategies? Am I in the right place? Do I have the right teams? Do I need them all in-house, or can I outsource expertise? Because it's one of the things about marketing as well, is every piece of marketing has gotten bigger, and you need expertise everywhere. And there's no way a CMO is going to be that one expert everywhere. And just probably limited chance that you're going to be able to have in-house experts on every single item. So where do I bring in freelancers? Where do I bring in an agency? Because it's punctual, because I just need to get started, because I need that expertise. So it's all about being more careful about where to spend, and keeping a bit of that eye on profitability of the business. Remember, you're a CMO, you're on the C-suite, you're responsible for company profitability as well. That's something that's changed a little bit over the last couple of years, and the current environment that we operate in. Do I need to do all these big, massive events? Do I need to spend all that paid acquisition? How can I build a brand with other means? How do I show up as being? And we'll talk about it. I think content's a big piece there. How do I even leverage what I've already done in my accounts? I've got accounts. How do I grow them? How do I expand them? I have a foot in the door, but I'm probably not deployed everywhere. So how do I keep doing that? So there's so many things you need to look at when you're thinking of growth in the environment that we're in today, and we don't know how it's going to last.
You said so many things in there that were important. I think one of the things is that on one end of the spectrum, I have CMOs that are coming on and are saying, Steve, I have a bit of imposter syndrome here, right? How do I earn the seat at the table? How do I have the respect of the CEO and the CRO? And they naturally, because that's where revenue, like the rubber hits the road. So it's like their role is solidified, but ours is much more than lead generation. We've been asked to do that. But how do we step up and take that role? And it's expanding. I think what you're saying here is expanding all the things that we have to do, but how can we as individuals, we don't have all of that, right? We don't, none of us do. So as leaders, we are as good as our team, right? But what you just introduced was, I think, was really interesting, is we have to like mold and expand the concept of what the team is. It doesn't have to be in-house. If we think everything has to be in-house, then we're thinking employees that we have to bring onto the team and the cost associated with that, where we can get very senior people that have done very expert things in niches, everything from attributions to putting together our tech stack to, you name it. So thinking about the team, how do I put together my team? Good leaders have high performance members on their team. And is that internal? Is that external? Right. I love that you're thinking about hypergrowth and bringing that collection of experts together that is a combination there, right? Because it's not going to cost as much to bring in a fractional way an expert in areas that needs to round out that team. Is that a good takeaway from what you were to say?
For sure. I go people first. A team is a collection of individuals. So I think of their skill set. I think of what I need as a team on its own. I don't want a team of clones, because that's not interesting in marketing. You need creative people, and you need data people, and you need visionary people, right? So if I come on board, the first thing I'm going to do is have these personal conversations with people because I'm trying to understand who they are. Have I got a team of clones? Have I got the variety that I require? And then I look at the jobs. And then I look at what exactly technically do they need to know? Do they know? But then I'm also matching it with exactly what I know I need to get to somewhere. And so if I need to supplement with more experts or training in some cases, then that's what I do. But it's a collection of people that makes us work. You said something earlier, which is imposter syndrome compared to the rest of the C-suite. I think a big piece of our job, and I suffer from it, and I think every CMO does, is explaining what you're going to do and then making sure people understand you're not always the expert in that specific area, but your role is to make sure you have the right people who are the experts.
Well, there's two areas on creating this hypergrowth that I want to get to. I also run a podcast in the HR industry, and we do a lot of work and talk to a lot of experts about the importance of company culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And company culture and team culture. And one of the very first things that it does for a business is it attracts the right people. Candidates these days, they're interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them. And if you're going to attract the high performance team members that are going to stay, they're not going to have to retrain, right? That they're going to be loyal and a big contributor to this team, then we've got to think about our team culture and how it fits into the company culture. I interviewed a CISO, a chief security officer. He said, Steve, when I came into this new role, the very first thing I did, step one, was how do I assess the culture in this team and make sure it is a culture where there's emotional security and safety, right? That we can recommend or we can question, we can do the kinds of things without worrying about whoever I report to is going to be worried about it or that there's politics involved. He said, how do we create a team that's cohesive together? And I think it's the reason why that like VCs, private equity companies, they invest first in the team versus the idea, right? The team is a higher priority than the actual idea. So this idea of creating hyper growth, I love that you focused on the team. And I'd like to just ask you about your thoughts in terms of the culture that you like to create on your team and why that's important.
I like transparency and I want people to be themselves. I think there's a behavior you need to have in the workplace for sure. You can't just accept and tolerate any type of behavior. But you work in marketing. You got to be creative. You want people to come up with ideas all the time. I may not be the best person to come up with the most creative ideas because that's not how my brain is wired. But I am going to make everything possible to ensure that my team has the freedom to surface these ideas, to say what they think, because I hired them to do that. They are the expert in their own domain, and I need them to be able to do that. I want them to know that I expect them to come to me with a discussion and say, hey, Peggy, I actually don't agree with this, or shouldn't we be doing this? At the same time, to collaborate together. This isn't about individuality. This is about a team. And I want them to work together because when you run a marketing team, it's a well orchestrated and well oiled machine. Businesses and insights isn't doing what they're meant to do and giving to product marketing what they need, then product marketing isn't going to orchestrate the campaign with communication and events and social media, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't work. So, collaboration, absolutely. But you need to be yourself. If you're just going to show up with a mask every day and not be yourself, it doesn't work. I truly, truly believe that. And I expect that of my teams. And I expect them to collaborate with the other teams as well. I can't talk about other teams if I'm not talking about sales and the product team. These are probably the two: sales, customer success, and product. We need to be there.
Marketing, our first customer is really our internal teams.
For sure. For sure. And I tend to say, I would push that a little bit further. I tend to say that marketing sometimes unites nations, right? We're the one with a white flag. What we care about is the customer and the results. And so we're the voice of the customers. That's what matters. And that should be what everybody in a company rallies around. So that is the way I look at it.
So you just introduced the next part of the hypergrowth model is we represent the customer, right? So in one way, a lot of companies, you think about it, like Sales lots of times feels like they own it because they're having conversations with prospects every single day, right? Customer success, they own the relationship with the customer and they're having conversations with it. But the sales team, they're in a sales environment. And it was interesting. There was a study that Gong did, and they looked at over 4,000 sales conversations. What they came up with is that the sales rep talks 2/3 to 3/4 of the time. And it's an environment where you're selling, right? So there's a shield. If this conversation, I was trying to sell you something, right? It'd be a very different environment, right? You'd be more guarded in what you're doing. You would never design a learning program about your customers and run it through a sales process. That's just not the way that you would design that to happen. You wouldn't run it through a customer success process either. They're trying to put out fires. They're trying to answer questions. They're trying to cross sell and upsell, right? They're genuinely trying to learn, but you wouldn't say, that's the way I would design a learning program about the customer. So when you say we own the voice of the customer, that really is something that is a priority that we need to move up on our list because that's the highest voice of authority in the business, right? It's actually what most CMOs say gives them the right to be at the seat of the table, right? Because if you're representing the voice of highest authority, that trumps everything. That trumps the opinions, the perspectives of everybody in the room. If you've heard of Amazon, they actually have an empty chair policy. It was kind of started before COVID, right? But it's now the virtual empty chair where they literally have an empty chair in the room or virtually that represents if the customer were here in this meeting, how would that be influencing the decisions we're making? That's the voice of highest authority. How do you gather the voice of highest authority? How do you get voice of customer, right? And be that expert and then share that within the company?
I think that is essential if you're talking growth anywhere, right? If you have a product that there's no market for, you're never going to grow. So you're either going to have to adapt it by making sure you deliver to your customers what they want, or you're going to die. There's no question in the fact that customer success, account management, they want the relationship, the one-to-ones, etc. But I think what marketing does is it looks at the bigger picture, right? It will actually look at and say, this isn't about who's screaming the loudest, which client is screaming the loudest, which account manager is screaming the loudest. We look at the perspective and try to build trends. And the trends can also come from outside. And that's where everything around insights, business insight, competitor watch, where the world is heading. How is that going to impact customers? What are they going to want? Not today, but in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years. All of that is what makes up the voice of the customer. I will never pretend to know I know a customer better than an account manager or customer success. No way. That is not what I'm trying to do. But I want to make sure I have the right relationship with the account manager that enables me to bring in some of these representative clients to the table and share what they need. There's so many ways you can do that. You've got the tools, you've got the quick surveys, you've got the product advisory boards, you've got the one-on-ones. It depends where you are, what you want to do, what the resources you have. But you have to have that pulse on what's happening outside, for sure.
So, interesting question. What is the role? Because I like that you did this, right? That the understanding of the customers, understanding their world, it's understanding all their challenges. As a company, we may help out with this much of this, but we should never pretend that we handle everything for them, right? But if we're going to be an advisor, we're going to be trusted. They want to know that we get what they have to do to be successful, right? There's that context of understanding the bigger picture. And a lot of B2B companies, we focus on what we do, and that's what we know, right? And so I like that you talked about knowing the broader perspective because that's going to allow us to, like the Gartner trusted advisor, right? But to be seen not as a vendor, but more of as a peer, as a colleague. And the goal, that would be where we really want to be. That's why a lot of CMOs, they come to this podcast and they say, Steve, I started a CMO position. The number one thing I do is I pick up the phone, I start calling, start having conversations with our customers that isn't about handling a specific issue or cross-selling or upselling. It's not that kind of an environment at all. It's a learning environment about them. How important in your mind is it that we're constantly staying in touch with customers and understanding this broader picture as part of that voice of the customer?
It's absolutely essential. But you know what's funny about it? Customer organization are very touchy about marketing speaking to their clients. It's probably one of the hardest battle I've had in every single company, which is how can I get access to the client? You spend time telling them why if they don't understand it. But even then, you literally have to plead and well, I've got to be there or I will listen in. This is where you either been able to build that one-on-one relationship with that account manager. It's actually the hardest piece because once you get to the client, they're often very happy to talk to you.
Oh, absolutely.
It's quite interesting. I don't think there's been one company where I haven't heard that, which is, oh, yeah, or, well, we can't get access to the clients, Peggy. How can we do it? Can you help? You've got to talk to your peer. And I think it really is a struggle. Everybody values it, but it's still a struggle. And I'll just comment on one more thing that you said earlier. I did go like this, where you've got to have the biggest picture.
Yes.
And I'm also going to do this. And I'm going to go, okay, but where marketing plays a role is when you start looking at segmentation. You start building trends within your customer base and seeing what matters. What are the use cases that this industry has? What's specific to them so that you can actually go and target them either with whatever material you're building or making sure we have the product that we need to answer their needs, right? So it's big and small. And that's what marketing does. We look at the big picture and we make it smaller again.
So I want to ask a question about something. I like the big and the small, and we have to, right? We got to personalize. We have to understand in smaller segments, and what do we do as a result of that? There's no doubt about it. But when you talked about the difficulty of even talking to the customers, we're constantly trying to produce content that lubricates the sales process, like lubricates the customer success process. Yet we're being told, don't talk to the customer, right? Don't bug the sales team. They're really busy right now. So here's what's interesting about this is in all the conversations that I have on the podcast here, we have a call that we just talked beforehand about what do we want to talk about in the podcast. And I always start that out by asking everyone, so CMOs, CROs, CEOs, chief growth officers, what are the two greatest challenges to creating long-term successful growth? One of the through lines that has come from all of those people answering that same question is internal challenges are their greatest challenges. We're talking about hypergrowth, right? We want to talk about where's the market going? What's the competition look like? How much funding did we get? Because we have so much we can do. But the bottom line really is there's so much internally that is some of our greatest challenges. You reminded me of this, you just brought that up. These artificial boundaries between this. And I learned this was a chief growth officer. And he said, Steve, it's the reason why, and I copied him. He said, on my email signature, it's hashtag one team. It's because we are one team, sales, one team, customer success, all of us together, right? We are one team. I put it in my email. I know how, because I think we're also one team with our clients too, right? It's a good mentality. If we don't break down those barriers, the reason why those kinds of questions are coming up because they don't understand the benefit of allowing us to talk to their customers really has. And shame on us if we haven't articulated that, if we haven't demonstrated that, right? It's incredible that we as marketers wouldn't have access to our own customers, wouldn't have access to our own sales team that we're doing all the enablement for. Maybe that's why the industry has rated over 60% of the content that marketing sends over to sales, they don't use. They don't even care about. There's an article that came out in Forbes and it talked about they graded content overall for the industry. You know what they gave B2B content as a grade? A D minus.
If they stole your own G or something.
Oh, look, goodness, right? We have to break down these barriers. And these are all the things that we've been talking about here, whether it's talking constantly to your customer, being a one team with the other departments, whether it's how you create the culture within your own team, working with outside people. I talked to the head of customer relations with Avon for globally. And he said, I don't think about our outsourced partners as outsourced. I think of them as part of our team. They are on our team. They may reside in a different office. They may get paid by a different company, but they're part of our team. These are the mindsets that create hypergrowth, right?
Yeah.
So I love that you've kind of unfolded this story. I have one more question for you, all right? If there was one thing that you wanted the audience to take away from all of our conversation here today, what would that be?
There's almost two things, right? One is you got to go back to the basics. If you want to do hypergrowth, you got to be willing to open up and say, okay, and really look at things diligently and say what works, what doesn't work. Because if you're just going to spin actions without having a strategy that answers to a problem or a need, that's not really going to work. And then beyond that, the basics for me, it's brand, it's product marketing. It really is a fundamental in my world. Brand, because that creates a long lasting effects that in case of downturn, it's going to work. It'll keep you running and sustain for a little while versus you turn off a plate tap and it just turns off, right? It disappears. So brand, product marketing, content, critical basics in my world that you want to get right. And then the fourth one is the team. You want to get that right. Whatever your team looks like, internal, external, you got to get that right because you're not going to do it on your own. I think all of that is to make sure you enable business.
Well, I know one thing for sure. People are going to have questions. I know. I'm sure it's watching this. Would it be appropriate that we gave out a link to your LinkedIn profile so people could reach out to you?
Yes, for sure. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Well, Peggy, thank you. Thank you for coming in and your worldwide experience, right? And working with hypergrowth startups to companies that are more established. Some of these are the things that we know innately, but we really, really need that reminder of what's going to help create that success. And a lot of it is internal. So thank you for sharing all of your perspectives. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Really enjoyed this. Thank you, Steve.